Today's session will be about the most impactful emerging specialty areas and research fronts for 2023. So this is the agenda for today's session. We'll start. The Web of Science core collection is the data source that we will use today to conduct some analysis. Next, I will offer an overview of 2023 research captured in the Web of Science core collection. Then we'll have a look at how we can map science based on publication and citation data. And I will also explain the concept of what we call research fronts. Then the following point is about the 2023 research fronts. I'll go through the active fields, hot and emerging areas of research to highlight the research fronts of 2023. And last will be about some references and additional resources that I will share with you. I'll start with the Web of Science core collection as the data source. So Web of Science core collection is at the heart of the Web of Science platform. So this is what we represent here on the left-hand side. We have several databases in the Web of Science platform. The one that we call Web of Science core collection is composed of journals in science, social sciences, arts, humanities, and the emerging source citation index. Then we have books and conference proceedings. So that's the database we will focus on today. A few statistics on the right-hand side to characterize this database. So we're talking about more than 90 million records, meaning publications. Web of Science core collection is a database built by our editors, by our content team. So it's the database that you'll find only in the Web of Science. And as you know, Clarivate is not a publisher. That's why we call it a publisher-neutral database, in a sense that when we select journals, there is no difference in terms of publisher being indexed in the database. Something very useful to do those analysis that we'll cover today is the citations and references. So we're talking about more than 2 billion citation references. We cover, so it's a multidisciplinary platform. We cover 254 subject categories. Those are the categories of the journals. And in terms of journals, we index more than 21,000 high-quality journals in the core collection. I'm not talking about the whole platform. In the whole platform, we have more than 34,000. But in core collection, we're talking about 21,000, what we call index journals in the Web of Science. Something very useful that we also do in terms of data curation or data unification is the names of the institutions, the addresses. So there is the unification work that is being done. And we've done that exercise or unification of addresses for more than 17,000 institutions. So the exercise or the analysis that I've done and that I will present today is something that I will do today for the whole world, but we could obviously do the same at the country level and the institutional level. We index all the author names and affiliations, so there is always a link between an author name and his or her address. Something that we've seen in a previous webinar was about the funding information. So we have more than 14 million publications with funding information that you see in funding acknowledgements, for example, with grant data as well. So we don't only index journal publications, but also conference proceedings, as I mentioned earlier. So we're talking about more than 30,000 conference proceedings and 140,000 books. So this is the primary source, right? The primary source that we use as part of the analysis that I will present today. We're talking about journals. Right? There is no third-party database. We use only core collections and we use only journals indexed in the core collection. This is slightly off topic, but when I talk about journal selection, there is a consistent indexing policy that we've used since 1960s. And obviously when you have consistent metadata, you can conduct consistent analytics or analysis. So when we talk about core collection, here we're doing some analysis and we want to know about the major research fronts and the hot topics, active fields for a specific year. But Web of Science core collection, as you know, is also used by researchers, right, to track the development and evolution of ideas. So that's what you do when you do a literature review. You want to understand the development of a specific research topic. For instance, you can uncover related research via citation linking. Researchers or users in search engine, when they use Web of Science or any search engine, you usually put some keywords. But when you use citations and references, you can map the literature. You can map the science and see how publications are related, right? And that's what we call a citation network. On top of that, there is a study that you can have a look at later on when you'll have the presentation. The link is here. More researchers rely on the Web of Science core collection than on Scopus and Google Scholar for systematic review and research evaluation. So the data is not only there in the platform to read publications, but also for research evaluation. When you do research evaluation or research management, it's relatively easy to have an understanding of the activity of a specific researcher, institution, country, or a region, or even a department, for example, based on publication data. I mentioned already the strict evaluation process that we have in place, as well as the data curation that we do and the consistency in indexing the content. And that's what we provide in the platform to have quality analysis. So over 21,500 journals, again, so these are the databases that with journals in science, social sciences, art humanities, and emerging source citation index to do those analysis, right? So there is a lot of data curation, data slicing, cleaning to make sure the data is in a good shape to do different types of analysis, right? In terms of metadata construction, very important element is the cited references. That's why we call that a citation index. Citation index is where publications are linked between each other based on citations and references. And it goes back to 1900. Very useful to discover the origin of today's research activities. You can go back and see, for example, when we talked about coronavirus, there were some papers already talking about coronavirus. That was not a new thing, right? And it goes back, if I'm not wrong, 1967. So it was in the 60s where someone was already talking about a coronavirus. I talked already about the author names and addresses. Very useful when you want to do those analyses at a country level or at an institutional level or at an author level, right? And all this analysis, you can couple them with other types of analysis, for instance, related to funding, right? So you found an active field in 2023, a hot topic, or what we call a research front, and you want to know who has funded research in that specific field. So this is also something that you can do to better understand the funding landscape and to connect the different outputs to the source of money or the source of funding. The addresses, this is something very useful. But then what we do is also the unification, right? So if you take your institution, it has a name, it has an official name, but the addresses that we find in the publications very often are not standardized. They're not unified. And that's what we do to curate and enrich the data set in the database. Web of Science is updated daily, so you have to-date content. And we talk about cover to cover, meaning when we index a journal, we will index all the publications of that journal. We don't do a selection within the journals. Right, next, let's go for the overview of 2023 research captured in the Web of Science core collection. So you'll see here some numbers in terms of volume of publications that we have in the platform for 2020. So when we search the Web of Science core collection, so this is a search on the date, right? 1st of January 2023 until 31st of December 2023. We have more than 2.8 million publications. A great majority of those publications are journal articles. 2 million out of 2.8 million are articles. It's actually more because part of those early access publications, manuscripts that have been accepted for publications but that are not published yet, they're not assigned to a journal number or volume number yet. Some of them will also be articles here. Almost half of them, 48% of these publications, are in open access, 1.3 million out of 2.8 million. Right, that's really interesting. So when you struggle, you shouldn't struggle to find papers to read. Before you should have like a subscription or you pay to read papers. Now it's about 50%, right? Almost half of these publications are published in open access. Something that I want to highlight here is that more than 13,000 publications out of these 2.8 million publications are considered highly cited papers, meaning I'll explain that in a moment. So here we have an indication. The most cited publications came from Cancer Journal for clinicians, and it received more than 2,000 citations, right? And it was published in January 2023, and it got cited more than 2,000 times. And you see it has these two distinctions. It got this trophy. So this is in the Web of Science. it's an open access publication, 2,000 citations is enough, right? So this is an article, is enough to be in the top 1%. That's what we mean by highly cited paper. When we compare a paper with other papers of the same type, so we compare articles and articles, reviews and our reviews in the same field in the same year. The reason we do that, because publication of 2020 would have more time to receive citation than a paper of 2023. So you compare publications of the same year. But then we also compare within the same field, because we know oncology doesn't have the same level of citations than mathematics, for example. Mathematics is much lower. So in mathematics, you need less citations to be in the top 1% than in oncology. And this one also has this flame paper. It's very similar. We would compare publications of the same type in the same field published in the same year. But instead of top 1%, we take top 0.1%. So out of these 2.8 million publications, 1,292 are in the top 0.1%. These are publications that receive enough citations to be in the top 0.1%. 0.1% for hot papers, top 1% for highly cited papers. For highly cited papers, we look at 10 years of data. For hot papers, we look at 2 years of data, and we do that every 2 months. Okay, so let's move on. So this is another visualization of the research in 2023. Those 2.8 million publications, if I look at them by field, what we call Web of Science categories. So these are categories of the journals where the papers were published. We find that the most prolific areas with the highest number of publications, we find material science multidisciplinary, then EE, engineering, electrical, electronic, multidisciplinary chemistry, environmental sciences, and applied physics, and so on. If we only focus on social sciences and arts humanities, if I only look at these two databases, we have a different subset, and these are the categories where we had the highest number of publications in terms of publication activity in these fields. So we had public environmental, occupational health, then followed by environmental studies, almost the same level of output, then economics, again with this more or less the same, slightly more publications than psychiatry, right? 25,544, and here 25,166. Something we can also do in the platform is to represent not only the output by field, but also by topic. So you can classify publications not only by the category of the journal where the publication is published, but also what we call a citation topic. So a citation topic is a cluster, it's a group of papers that are highly related based on citations. And here we're talking about topics and not fields anymore. So here altogether at the meso level, so we have 3 levels, micro, meso, and macro. If we look at meso, the meso level, we had in 2023, 326 research areas of citation topics. So for example, let's have a look, nanoparticles. So obviously that's not a field, that's not a category, it's really a topic. It's related to a topic, right? So diabetes, for example, and so on. Soil sciences, we'll find that in plant sciences, for example, but perhaps in chemistry as well, if we look at the field. We already know those appearing in studies the most frequently, but however, what we can have a look at is the impact. So there's a way to do that. So you can have a look at the volume, right? So you have a scatter chart here. If we look at this scatter chart, we have to access the Web of Science documents. These are the number of publications, then the number of citations cumulated by each topic, and the size of the bubble or the circle is the percentage of highly cited papers. Here, what I want to do is not only the volume, not only the volume is interesting, but I want to look at the number of citations received by each topic, but also in each field, I want to know what's the proportion, the share of papers that are highly cited. So let's say, for example, here I'm looking at, so this is 9 fields, and we see the yellow one is electrochemistry. That's where we had the highest number of publications, almost 35,000, 33,000, as we've seen in the previous slide, and they accumulated about 55,000 citations. And the size of the circle is pretty big, meaning that in this field, the proportion of highly cited papers, meaning papers in the top 1%, is also quite high when compared to other fields. The red one is interesting, metallurgical engineering. Lower volume of publications, lower volume of citations. It's below the group average in both cases. But the proportion, the size of the bubble, almost the same as the blue one. The blue one is also interesting. Immunology, slightly above group average in terms of citations, slightly below average in terms of number of publication, the group average. But the proportion of publications in immunology that are highly cited papers is also relatively high compared to the other fields. We could also showcase that if we look at in 2023, if we focus on the 13,000 publications that are highly cited papers, and I want to know in which fields those highly cited papers are published in, as well as the hot papers, we would have a breakdown by field. So multidisciplinary chemistry, out of 13,000 very influential publications, 1,000 of them are in multidisciplinary chemistry. Then material sciences, physical chemistry, and so on. So it's very similar to what I was looking at earlier. Before I was looking at all the publications in 2020. Now I'm focusing on those highly cited papers and hot papers, those papers that receive very high number of citations to be in the top 1%, top 0.1%. So these are the fields. I do the same analysis, but now I'm not looking at the whole field or the whole research area anymore. I'm looking at the topics. And now we find electrochemistry, and then computer vision and graphics, and so on. And we do the same. So this is for the highly cited papers, and this one is for the hot papers. Again, we retrieve electrochemistry come first. Computer vision is interesting, right? So this is where you would find the higher proportion of documents in the top cited publication clusters. So here we have electrochemistry, and then the blue one is again immunology. Green one is computer vision and graphics. We can also represent that in a different way. Now I'm not looking at the meso level, I'm looking at the micro level. So that's the most granular approach to characterize research. And now I'm sure you will retrieve some or recognize some of the buzzwords like deep learning, for example, coronavirus, of course, supercapacitor. So these are the topics of research in 2023 who took the lead. So the top micro topic for 3 seems to be deep learning, but only, that's interesting, only if you look at this output. So this is where you have the highest number of publications, but only if 25% of these publications were cited. Whereas in the other topics, it's about 45%, almost 10% of those publications are cited. And the most cited topic here you see with over 15,300 citations and a citation impact of 1.7 is supercapacitor. So supercapacitor is the topic that received the highest number of citations. 1.7, the world average is 1. So this topic, those publications in this topic were cited on average 70% more than the world average. Yeah, so let's move on. If we focus on we just look at different indicators. So previously I was looking at the volume of publications and the number of citations. If I focus on citation impact, you'll get a different ranking. So if I change the perspective from absolute values of published documents and the number of citations to something that is more contextual, right, to identify emerging areas. So we see microwave absorption, planetary systems, and so on. All of these topics are very influential when compared to the world average. The world average is 1. So, for example, this publication is this topic were cited on average more than 130% more than the world average. When you consider more indicators, not only volume and number of citations, you have more context and you have more insights and you can make more meaningful analysis and not just focusing on number of publications or number of citations. So here you have more context where you can compare the impact of the output, the impact of a topic with the rest of the world. So the question is, how can we map science? And I want to explain the idea of research fronts. So here I want to go for the next part of the presentation. The question is, how can we map science? And what do we mean by research fronts? There are many ways to look at map of science or science maps. Two dimensions that are represented here, the research process and the research progress. And this is something that we can visualize through science mapping of publications. So again, two axes here, the research progress on the x-axis and research process on the y-axis. So when you look at citations and reference data, the citation feedback between the development of a project, the emerging knowledge, and the progress of ideas are captured in what we call cross-references. So this is something that you can read in more details from a report from ISI. It's called Global Research Report, Identifying Research Fronts in the Web of Science, from metrics to meaning. But in short here, what do we mean? There is an idea, pretty old idea, gets funded, the researchers discover something new, they share those findings through a publication that in turn gets cited, and that's something that we can use to evaluate the impact. We can evaluate the impact of a discovery based on number of citations. Of course, there are many other ways to look at the impact. The impact is something difficult to define when it comes to scientific research, but that's the process when we do research. That discovery later on can lead to other ideas which are more recent than the old idea. And it follows the same process of scientific research, and you'll get new outcomes because that's a new or recent idea. And that's what we mean by contribution. You contribute to something else. That previous publication can also lead to a new idea, which in turn gets cited, and so on. And then you have these different ideas that build up over time. But then out of those citations, you see that those publications don't have the same level of citations. Some of them are in the 10% and so on. Comes the idea of research fronts, where you can represent this as like the borders of the current knowledge. So this is what is pushing the current knowledge that we have, that humanity has. So these are the new frontiers, I would say. That's why we call them research. So we look at the most influential works, where multiple papers direct their citations, they cite, and that is likely to speed progress. So that's what we mean by research front, with the idea of research process and research progress. So how can we map science? So this is a heat map where we display similar research in the sense of co-citations. Similar research appears next to each other. So we do a grouping of publication. Each and every dot here or pixel is a paper or group of papers. And the position on the map means that publications are related. They are similar because they co-cite, meaning they cite together the same literature. Paper A and paper B, common citations, common references, right? Then they are related. They are similar based on the co-citation. So something that you can do when it comes to science maps, you can visualize the location of publications and groups of publications that are related within a two-dimension figure or picture like the one that I'm showing right now. And here it helps us to have a better understanding of the research landscape. We can make better interpretation and develop a better understanding of the progress and knowledge discovery. So the framework here is a heat map that looks like a chart of different islands with a blue ocean surrounding green islands with gray and white peaks. So the analogy here is that they are in fact islands of knowledge in a sea. It's like an ocean of knowledge. And the blue ocean here represent the area where there is relatively inactivity. There is no activity. So the height of the island peaks, right, the white areas that we see here, the height depends on the relative numbers of journals in each location and their proximity. So here, that's what we do when we look at Web of Science data, and we cluster publications and journals in groups of high similarity. So for example, if you look at, let's have a look at one area. Here, for example, you have clinical medicine, very closely related to public health and healthcare services, then biological sciences, right? So this is one big group. So this is something we can have a look at. Something more classic, mathematics, statistics, and computer science, very related. Computer science, then you have the engineering, and so on. So this is where the location of each area is important because it gives you an idea or indication of its similarity. So again, the areas of higher altitude correspond to the areas where you have the highest concentration of. So what are research fronts? So the method is relatively easy. We form research fronts when clusters of highly cited papers are frequently cited together, and that reflects a specific similarity or commonality in that research, right? So sometimes might be related to experimental data or a method or a concept or hypothesis. So when we talk about research front, think of it as a cluster of highly cited papers frequently cited together. So here the research front consists of a core of highly cited papers with the citing papers that have frequently co-cited a core. So in other words, what we mean here is the core papers are all highly cited papers in what we call essential science letters, another platform derived from the Web of Science data. So papers that rank in the top 1% in terms of citation in the same field and in the same publication year. So that's what we were looking at earlier, the highly cited papers. And since the authors, the institutions, the countries listed on the core papers have made a significant contribution to that specialty, then you can have a list of, in the analysis of the research fronts, there is like a tabulation appears in the analysis of the research front, right? Of course, if you read the full text of the citing articles, you'll get more precision in terms of the topic of the research front, especially in terms of its recent development or leading edge findings. Keep in mind, research fronts, they're defined as the most promising ideas and developments that are important for the future or further development of science and technology, right? So in 2023, we had 128 research fronts that included 110 hot and 18 emerging ones, right? So that's how we represent what we call research fronts, the citing papers, the co-citing papers, the research front. So these are the core papers. That's how we represent the research fronts. And we show them in a platform called Essential Science Indicators. So if I list, so it's a table of research fronts. So I want to list the research fronts, right? And here, for example, I have top papers. So that defines a research front. For example, conservative Hamiltonian for binary systems and black hole amplitude and so on. So cited 221 times, 223 times, right? So that's what we define as research fronts, right? So if you look at, this is one research classic called black hole scattering and so on, and you could have a look at the top papers and click on the 50, and I would have a list of related publication. So that's what we call the research front. And within this research front, you would have the list of related papers. Essential Science Indicators, so that's one tool built on Web of Science data, and that can help you identify top performing research in Web of Science Core collection. So we do that across 22 research fields. You can compare the citation performance of a paper with that of with a peer publication by publication period and field, and you can identify trends and emerging areas of research in sciences and social sciences. All right, so here what I want to explain here is that as part of the methodology, I mentioned already for 2023, 128 research fronts, 110 hot and 18 emerging ones, so new research fronts. Okay, so here the objective was to discover which research fronts were most active or developing the most rapidly, right? I want to go a bit fast here, time flies. I want to go through the list of those research fronts by field, right? So let's move on, get the presentation anyway. There is a formula that I want to showcase here called the CPT, is the ratio of the average citation impact of research front to the age occurrence of its citing papers, meaning the higher the number, the hotter or the more impactful the top. So when you have a research front, right, so that's what we mean by out of 128, 110 were hot, right? So defined by looking at here, C represent the number of citing articles, P is the number of core papers, T indicate the age of citing articles. You use this formula and that gives you an idea of how hot is the topic. So here is the list of the 2023 research fronts. I want to showcase the key fields, the hot and emerging areas of research in 2020, right? So these are the 11 key fields or broad areas. So agricultural, plant and animal sciences, ecology and environmental sciences, geosciences, clinical medicine, biological sciences, chemistry and material science, physics, astronomy and astrophysics, mathematics, information science, economics, psychology, and other social sciences. So these are the 11 broad areas. If we focus, and that's what I will do, I'll go through some few slides to explain the concept. So if we focus on agricultural, plant and animal sciences, the top 10 research fronts are the following. So think of it as in 2023, if you work in this field, these are the top 10 hot research fronts. So it seems that you have research on feed additives or improving the immunity of aquatic animals. That's a research front. In that research front, you have 22 core papers which cumulated 1,561 citations. And the core papers, you see, the mean year of core papers, the mean is 2020. So this is relatively recent research, 2019, 2020, and so on, right? So you can have a look at the report. That's a peer report, but that's something that you hear quite a lot. Research of substitution of plant-based meat and cultured meat. So this is something that we see, right? So you make meat based on plants and not animals anymore. So 50 core papers. It seems that this is like a new research. Think of it as a researcher. If you're full of research topics or ideas, and if this is your field, then you need to know that there is a lot of research being done on these new topics, right? So this is for agricultural, plant and animal sciences. But if we look here for ecology and environmental sciences, key research fronts here, you see this one, very interesting, 48 core papers, 9,518 citations, environmental fate and ecotoxicity of microplastics in soils. So we're getting a lot of plastic in the soil where we grow our food, vegetables, and so on. So that's a hot research front, right? Let me move to another area. Okay, yeah, clinical medicine. I'm sure you've seen this, CRISPR, right? So where researchers, they develop new therapies to edit genes, right? And you could have a look at that. Someone was granted the Nobel Prize, won the Nobel Prize based on this research. So this is very new in clinical medicine, very emerging topic and a hot research front. Let's have a look at something else. Let's have a look. You'll have the list, as I said, anyway. Let's have a look at another field. All right, so let's have a look at something more into economics, social sciences, right? Supply chain, risk management, and the application of blockchain technology. Very interesting. You have like the logistics area, supply chain, and then you have the technology, blockchain, right? So something here interesting is these two topics. For example, AI, ethics, that's obviously something that is trending, relatively new, right? Here, one emerging, that's also visible in this table, one emerging research front that has been identified in the field of economics, psychology, and other social sciences, is the development of the human-centric, sustainable, and resilient Industry 5.0, right? So again, you see 2021, very recent year of our papers. Right, so this data is coming from our platform. You will find it also in annual report that is done in partnership with the Chinese Academy of Science. It's called the Research France 2023 Annual Report. So it is the number 10th annual joint report between Clarivate and the Chinese Academy of Science. And you see here the latest progress and the evolving direction of scientific fields. And the way we do that now, you understand how it's done. You look at publication data, citation within the field. You look at core papers, highly cited papers, and you look at the emerging ones and the new research fronts, right? You'll see in that report, there is a distribution by country. If you look at one research front, you look at the core papers, citing papers are coming from which country and so on. So lots of analysis available in that report. So the key message that I want to convey today is that you can use Web of Science data or research fronts not only when you do literature review, but also as a researcher, right? So it may help you to suggest how a research career might be shaped. So an author, you can locate your current activity and see how close you are based on your work to a research front, right? So this is also something you can have a look at from a researcher perspective. For institutions, of course, the need would be different, but something you can do is as a researcher, as a research manager, you can analyze the distribution of the output of your institution right across the whole scientific landscape, and you can filter on the most recent publications or different time windows and see how those publications are related to the research fronts, for example, right? And that's interesting when you want to compare your institution with another peer institution, for example. For research funders, here when you're able to identify the distribution of publication from funded projects, a funder or research agency can see whether its investments are producing work located in or near research fronts, right? So now you understand if you have a paper, you can visualize very quickly how close your publication is with regards to a research front, right? And that can also inform decision policy in redirecting or funding specific projects related to set list of topics. So related to what I just mentioned in terms of policy making as well, something at the national level, perhaps you have distribution of a national portfolio, and you want to focus on certain areas. So that's one way of using this data as well. And publishers, of course, because all these publications are published somewhere, right? So they can set appropriate policies in terms of editorial policies, and they can be adjusted according to the current research landscape. In the presentation, you will have access to some additional resources and references. Something that I want to mention is the 2024 product roadmap, where you will see a research front module that is coming relatively soon, first half of 2024, to better assess the research impact in insights, right? So you'll see better way to identify emerging research fields and expertise using that new module in insights, and you can report on that to inform decisions. So I cited or referred to many different resources during the presentation. Some resources that you can look at how to define the method to define research trends and fronts, the global research report that I mentioned, from metrics to meaning, when it comes to research fronts in the Web of Science, the Research Fronts 2023 annual report done in partnership with Chinese Academy of Science. There's a recording that was done also of a webinar available here. So that's the link of the recording of a webinar about research fronts and the global research reports and insights done by ISI. So I just want to have enough time to go through questions and answers. So you have, I just want to have enough time to go through questions. So you have access to a chat in the Q&A section. So let me have a look. Was there any question or comment posted in the chat or in Q&A? This session was announced as a session in English. So someone was asking to speak in a different language, but this session is done in English, but there will be another session similar done in other languages, and they're all publicly available on our website. All right, thank you very much. If there's no question, I'll give you back some time. Thank you very much for joining the session, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.